great subject tonight. In fact, I'd say that tonight's class and the subject is actually a step change in a number of ways. Not that it's going to be more difficult. I think it may actually be slightly less complex and difficult than some of the others. But I want to spend a bit of time setting the scene, setting it up. And to do that, I wanted to do a bit of summarizing of the last 4 sessions and build it to our subject matter for tonight. So over the past 4 weeks, we've been studying a number of stories in the book of Genesis, which of course begins with the physical creation of the world. And the stories that we've explored have all looked at a series of very complex spiritual currents that flow just beneath the surface of the physical world. And they're all expressed in very deceptively simple stories. And the stories are so vivid and they're so memorable that they've become universally known. But what we've discovered in the course of this journey is that a little bit like icebergs in the sea, there's more that lies beneath the surface than shows above the surface. But there's been a certain kind of common denominator in all the stories that we've covered. And they seem to be that things don't always seem to work out the way God originally intended them. We're constantly given a glimpse of what the world could have been, only to discover that something, in inverted commas, goes wrong, with very far-reaching consequences that alter the entire balance of the spiritual forces that underlie reality. So, just to emphasize this, in the first lesson, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we initially see a world in which good and evil are clearly distinct and identifiable. And then, as a result of the serpent's deception, Eve's gullibility, Adam's compliance, there's a mixture, it brings about a mixture of good and evil in which they are so intertwined that it becomes difficult to distinguish one from the other. Every good contains some evil, every evil contains some good, and from that point onwards, the ability of human beings to promote good and reject evil is always going to be a big struggle. In the second lesson, the story of the flood, we saw almost a reset of creation, almost a recreation of the world from its original state in which human beings played a passive role as recipients of God's beneficence, to one in which they were invested with an ability to change outcomes for good or for bad. And we termed this shift from a top-down model a bottom-up one. And then in the third lesson, the story of Jacob's deception of Isaac and the stealing of the blessings from his brother Esau, we encountered these great big spiritual forces in the world of tohu, chaos, as embodied in the character and the personality of Esau, and of tikkun, the power of repair, as embodied in the character and the personality of Jacob. We learned that the powerful forces of tohu bear within them the seeds of corruption and destruction. If they are not carefully managed, they have to be harnessed by the weaker, but by the more stable forces of tikkun. And therefore, as a consequence, Jacob, who is tikkun, has to receive both the material blessings of tohu, the dew of the heavens, the fat of the earth, in Isaac's language, as well as the spiritual blessings of tikkun, the spiritual legacy of Abraham, the blessing that he received from his father. But what emerged from that story is that the two dimensions of created existence, spirit and matter, ideas and actions, are going to remain in an eternal conflict for dominance throughout the story of creation. And then we came to the fourth lesson last week, yet another deception, in which Jacob is forced to marry Leah as well as Rachel, who is the only woman that he really wanted to marry. And there we see the themes of tikkun and tohu taken one stage further. Leah, as we as we learned, represents the attribute of teshuvah, the power of return, the spiritual capability to act on these wild, wayward forces of tohu and return them to their divine force, their divine source. And Jacob's marriage to Leah, therefore, in a sense, combines his power of tikkun with hers of teshuvah. Tikkun and teshuvah become connected. And then his marriage to Rachel, who is herself an expression of tikkun, beautiful of form, brings about a perfection in tikkun. Tikkun is now joined with tikkun. So Jacob's marriage to the sisters produced what we understood with Kabbalistic terms, the children of Leah, headed by Judah, the head of the tribe, and the children of Rachel, headed by Joseph. And they represent now two strands which are going to run through Jewish history, a further twist of the already existent conflict between spirit and matter that was begun with Esav and Yaakov. And Joseph, the product of Jacob's marriage to Rachel, the union of tikkun with tikkun, represents the pursuit of spiritual perfection in a human being, which we defined in terms of a deeper relationship with God through prayer, the refinement of human nature by weeding out negative character traits such as selfishness or anger or laziness or jealousy, etc., creating a harmonious home environment, creating good relationships. All of that is the combination of tikkun with tikkun. That's Jacob and Rachel. That's the children of Rachel represented by Joseph. That's his stream. And Judah, the product of Jacob's marriage to Leah, which is the union of tikkun with teshuvah, represents the pursuit of tikkun olam, improving the world, which we said includes the fight for justice, overcoming illness, ignorance, poverty, disease, all the universal goals for humanity. So that represents really the briefest of synopses, the synopsis of the past 4 lessons. And I understand that it's entirely possible that you didn't absorb all of the details of these major concepts because we went through them in some speed, and also possibly my deficiency in being able to explain them with sufficient clarity. But if you have the time and the patience or the inclination, they've all been recorded and it'll be found in the archive section of our website if you want to go back there. Together with your workbooks, and you can study them, restudy them if you wish. But the point I'm making is that it suffices for tonight's lesson that you should simply have a better understanding of these ideas. I'm very pleased to see that your manservant has brought your coffee to you in time. Well trained, excellent. Yeah. So it's fine if you've got a general understanding of these ideas, even if they're not complete ones, because they are foundational concepts of the inner Torah, and they all form the basis for the next stage in our journey tonight. If I could put it in terms of a metaphor, it's like painting by numbers. Each one of these concepts has just colored in another segment of the overall painting, and the painting is beginning to take shape, but we still can't see the entire picture. So just to point out to you that all of these stories that we've covered in the book of Genesis take up approximately the first 2,000 years of creation. And this entire period is called the age of Tohu, the age of chaos. And it's towards the end of this period, starting with the birth of Abraham, that the forces of tikkun, particularly the ones which we studied in the last 2 sessions, begin to come into play in the episodes that we've studied. So I say all of this because one has the impression that the world is clearly working towards something. It's being prepared for something. But what? What is God's purpose in creation, with all of its tantalizing glimpses of perfection and its resets and its duplicitous moments and events? Where's this all leading to? What's the build-up for? So to discover the answer to these questions, we then have to turn to the second book of the Bible, the book of Exodus, and in particular, an epic event. The first 2,000 years of Tohu, the age of Tohu, prepare the world, begin to set the world on its journey towards its ultimate purpose. And the next 2,000 years are termed by the sages the age of Tikkun, the age of Torah. And it will bring in these 2,000 years the world to the fulfillment of its divine purpose. To do that, there are two more elements that have to come into play. God needs an agent who's going to take the world towards its divine fulfillment, an agent who's going to be invested with the divine ability to carry out the task, and the agent is going to require specific tools to do the job. With that lengthy introduction, we can now turn to description of the greatest moment in human history with our first video that describes, of course, the revelation at Sinai, Matan Torah, the moment in which the agent was empowered and given the appropriate tool. So we're going to go now to share screen with our text number one. And this, of course, is in your text, in your books on page 142. It's text number one, but you're going to hear it read again by that lovely mellifluous voice with that awful music. But you can follow it in your workbooks if you wish. Once again, if you just let me know that you are, a thumbs up to let me know that you are seeing this. Thank you.
In the third month of the children of Israel's exodus from the land of Egypt, on this day they arrived in the Sinai desert, and Israel encamped there opposite the mountain. Moses ascended to God, and God called to him from the mountain to say, "So shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to Egypt. I carried you on the wings of eagles and brought you to me. And now, if you will listen to my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my own treasure from among all peoples. You will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." Moses came and called the elders of Israel, and he placed before them all these words. And all the people replied in unison, and they said, "All that God has spoken, we will do." It was on the third day, when it was morning, there were thunder and lightning and a thick cloud upon the mountain, and the sound of the shofar, exceedingly strong. Moses brought the people out from the camp toward God, and they stood beneath the mountain. God descended upon Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. God spoke all these words to say, "I am God, your God, who took you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of slavery. Do not have any other gods before me. Do not make for yourselves a graven form or an image of anything in the heaven above or on the earth below. Do not bow to them and do not serve them. Do not take the name of God, your God, in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness against your fellow. Do not covet anything that is your fellow's." And all the people saw the sounds and the torches, and the sound of the shofar, and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled, and they stood from afar. And to Moses he said, "Come up to God." Moses entered within the cloud, and he ascended the mountain. And Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. And when he had finished speaking with him on Mount Sinai, he gave to Moses the 2 tablets of the testament, tablets of stone inscribed by the finger of God.
I hope, by the way, you noticed that the tablets were square or rectangular, not as they're depicted in pretty much every image on or shul above the ark, etc. The whole idea of the rounded tablets is not a Jewish concept at all. It came from the Renaissance sculptors and painters, etc. They had to fit into a square box, and they fitted perfectly, so it couldn't be round on the top. Yeah, just as a point of interest. Okay, so what we discovered is that the agent who is chosen to fulfill the divine purpose is the fledgling Jewish nation standing now at the foot of Sinai. And the instrument of the tools that they're going to be given to do the task that's been allotted to them is the Torah in the form of the 10 Commandments, which, by the way, as we'll see in a moment, actually, in summary form, encapsulates the whole of the Torah. This is how Moses described the event in the book of Deuteronomy, the last book of the Bible, shortly before his passing. It's on text number 2 on page 145. And once again, if you don't mind, would somebody care to read this text for us? It's a short one, it's an easy one, and anybody, whoever jumps in first, unmutes and goes for it.
I'll go.
Okay.
Ask now, is that the one, Rabbi?
Yep.
Ask now, after the early days that came before you, from the day that God created man upon the earth, and from one end of the heavens to the other, has there ever been the likes of this great thing, or has anything like it been heard? Has a people heard the voice of God speaking from within the fire, as you heard and lived? You were made to see you were made to see to know that God is the God. There is none else beside him.
Thank you, Estelle. And that emphasis that you had at the end of there is an important one, which we're going to be coming back to in a moment. But the question is, what was it about this event that led Moses to say that there'd never been anything like it before? I mean, obviously, God speaking to man is not something which happens in this kind of way every day. But there are some very specific and unique things about this event that occurred to the recipients, who I've called, and for our purposes, God's agents. So there are a couple of things. The first, by the way, is that differentiates this revelation from that of other religions, is known as the Kuzari principle, because it was first expressed by the 12th century sage, the author. He was an author, a physician, a poet, a very famous person called Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who wrote a very famous book called the Kuzari, which is a dialogue, a fictional dialogue between the king of the Khazars, who were an actual people, and a Jewish sage. And this Kuzari principle is the subject of our text number 3 on page 146. And again, a reader, please.
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Moses, the first Jewish leader, was not like them, the founders of other religions. He brought the entire people to stand at Mount Sinai for them to see with their own eyes, each in accordance with their ability, the revelation that he saw. As the verse states, they saw the God of Israel. They all could affirm to each other what they saw and heard. This removed from the heart of the nation the terrible suspicion, perhaps all of this is just the claim of a few individuals that prophecy came to them, for it is not possible to create a conspiracy in full sight of the masses.
Of course, very, very subtly, what Yehuda Halevi is doing over here is having a go at Christianity and Islam, both of which are built upon the testimony of one individual, a prophet. who says that they received an instruction from God and they passed it down in accordance with their belief. And what distinguishes Judaism from those two religions is that the moment of the inception, the moment of revelation, is something which occurs to the entire nation, not to one individual, which gives it a different kind of verification, so to speak. That's not particularly where we want to go tonight. It's just an important distinguishing feature that Moses is touching on over here when he says this event is different to any other. And the fact that approximately 2 million individuals directly experienced the divine revelation, they heard God speak the 10 Commandments, etc. The second unique feature was something which Estelle, in reading, first stumbled on and then got it right. And she stumbled on it because when you read it, it doesn't actually make sense. It's hinted at in Moses' words, you were made to see, to know that God, there's none other besides him. And by the way, the Kuzari that we've just read now, this piece also emphasizes the word see in text number 3 that we've just read. Because he says, as the verse states, they saw the God of Israel. So why are Moses and the Kuzari both emphasizing this idea of seeing? And the problem, of course, is what does it mean to see God? God's not a physical object who can be seen. What they're doing is they're actually both picking up a nuance in the verses that we heard in that video and that were part of our text number 1 on line number 46, as it happens, if you see that, where it reads, and all the people saw the sounds and the torches, and the sound of the shofar and the smoking mountain. And the people saw and trembled. Well, it's one thing to see a torch, that's easy. But how do you see a sound? Doesn't make sense. So the great Rabbi Akiva comments in the Midrash on this verse. It's a one-liner, so I'm not going to ask somebody to read it because they're going to be cheated of their reading opportunity if they only have to read one line. But it's text number 4 on page 147. Says Rabbi Akiva, they saw what was heard, and they heard what was seen. Now, by the way, it's very important to understand this word Shema in Hebrew. You all know exactly how to translate it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Actually, Shema doesn't mean hear. Which, by the way, is one of the reasons why Jonathan Sachs, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Oliver Shalom, of blessed memory now, I'm afraid, why he translates in his Siddur, doesn't translate it as hear, O Israel. He translates it as listen, O Israel, because the word Shema means to comprehend, to understand. That's what Shema means. So we're talking here in Rabbi Akiva's slightly enigmatic statement in his teaching that there was an inversion of senses between things that we see and things that we hear about and understand. They're switched. There is an important difference between seeing something and hearing something. When I see something, I see the thing itself, and it's very vivid. When I hear something, the knowledge is secondhand. I hear about a thing as opposed to seeing the thing with my own eyes. And as a consequence, sight is a lot more convincing than hearing. It makes a much more powerful impression. If I've seen something, you're going to be really hard pressed to convince me that I didn't see it. What are you talking about? I saw it with my own eyes. Don't tell me I didn't see it. If I heard something, even if I happen to trust the source of knowledge, I can be dissuaded from believing what I heard. No, you didn't hear correctly. That's not what it meant. So hearing is simply not the same thing as seeing with your own eyes. And physical things can be seen because they are real in the same way that we are real. So you can have a direct experience of them. On the other hand, spiritual realities are not real in the same way. Tell me what a soul is. I don't know. But we'll find out in the next course, next term, because that's what it's all about. But we can't experience something spiritual directly in the same way. You can hear about them by means of other mediums, either say through their effect on our lives. I know I have a soul because I can feel it. I can feel the effect of it. Or by means of a logical proof of their existence. There must be something which is behind materiality. There has to be some kind of energy that makes it work. Or we trust a source that has told us about it. Oh, if the Lubavitcher Rebbe told us there's a soul, there must be a soul. We trust him. He probably knows what he's talking about. Or the sages before him. So those are the important differences between hearing and seeing. And now to understand the reason for this inversion of senses that Rabbi Akiva is telling us about based upon a careful reading of the verse that they saw the sounds, this is going to be explained by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in text number 5 on page 148. And this time we're going to need another reader.
I'll do it, if that's okay.
Thank you.
This is what
giving the Torah achieved, that they saw what is heard, and they heard what is seen. That which is ordinarily heard, i.e. spirituality and godliness, which can only be perceived through hearing, the people of Israel perceived with the certainty and tangibility of sight. They saw godliness. On the other hand, material things which are ordinarily seen, they are now heard. The materiality of the world was like something that is perceived by hearing or by logical deduction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So for us, the physical world is reality, the spiritual world is something which we imagine. They were given the ability at that moment to experience the spiritual world as a reality and to look at the physical world as if it was something which they imagined, a complete inversion. And the point of all of this is to tell us that in this moment of choosing the Jewish nation to perform this task, it can't simply be a matter of an appointment or designation, a job offer. Guys, will you do this, please? This is your job now, off you go and do it. Something much bigger than that has to happen. They have to be empowered to do it. There's going to be a covenantal relationship that they entered into for all times. There had to be a profound transformational spiritual experience that would be seared into their souls and into their consciousness and into the consciousness of the souls of all subsequent generations who were also present at Sinai, albeit not in physical form yet. We were all there. And momentarily, the veil of physicality had to be lifted. You had to be able to perceive truth with a capital T, to see the spiritual essence of the universe, to view the world from the perspective of spiritual beings as opposed to physical ones who are bound and limited by the constraints of physical sight. Only then would they and every Jew or Jewess who's still to be born be invested with the spiritual power that was required to perform their mission in this physical and material world. I'll put it to you very, very crudely. They had to be zapped. And that's what happened at Sinai. And the tool that they were given had to be up to the task. It also had to be empowered with divine energy. So the 10 utterances spoken directly by God were invested with the capacity to change the world. Now, in the appendix on page 164, in text number 14, towards the back of your books, there's a fascinating little figure 5.2, or rather to start with text number 14. These 10 commandments encompass the whole of the Torah. They include all that is above and below. They incorporate the 10 utterances with which God created the world. They were engraved on tablets of stone, and all the secrets they contain were revealed to all who look upon them, to know and to see in them the 613 commandments of the Torah, which they include. That's taken directly from the Zohar. And figure number 5.2 on page 165 shows you how these 10 commandments then become the source of the 613 commandments. It's a very fascinating table, which we're not going to go through now, but which you can take a look at afterwards. I wanted to point it out to you because you might have missed the appendix when you do all of your careful revision of this class at the end of it. But it is, the point of it is that these 10 commandments are not just 10, they're everything. And the principles that underlie these laws have become universally accepted as the bedrock of human civilization. All the important principles such as the sanctity of life, freedom of choice, morality, equality, equality before the law, social justice, charity, the quest for world peace, all of these are contained in this Torah. This is the tool that was given to the Jewish people who will act as God's agents to perfect the world. And so embedded are these principles that it would be very difficult for us to imagine a world without them. So in a sense, the giving of the Torah in the year 2448 after creation, in our second 2,000 years, the 2,000 years defined as the years, the age of Torah, or the age of Tikkun, are the culmination, it seems, of all the events described in our previous 4 lessons that prepared the world and set the scene for the age of Torah, Tikkun, which is why I labored to go through them and to revise them. Because with this dramatic kind of like cosmic event, infinite God reaches down to the finite world, and the world now is ready through the power of the agent and the tool to unite the spiritual and the material and to bring the divine plan to perfection. And it seems to us that all the pieces are in place now for the fulfillment of the divine plan. Everything has led up to this moment. The beginning, really, of the age of Tikkun, which would have been a very nice point at which to end tonight's talk. We could have all had a really easy early night and said, well, it was a nice talk. We've been through 4 lessons. Shlomo showed us how the 5th one brings it all to culmination. We received the Torah at Sinai. It's got everything that's needed. We're now off and away. We're going to fix the world. There's just, I'm afraid, one small problem, which is going to delay us for a little bit longer. There was another oops. I would say, what is the most spoken word in history? Oops. And this time, it's a very, very big oops. Because as in the previous cases and all of our previous stories, once again, the divine purpose appears to be derailed. And as in all the other cases, the derailment changes the story completely. we're going to turn to our second video. As soon as I get rid of this one and load up the next one. And go back to our share screen.
The people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, and the people massed upon Aaron, and they said to him, "Arise, make us a god who will go before us. For this man Moses, who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him."
Text number 6, by the way, page 149.
"Remove the golden rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." He took them from their hand, and he formed it with a graving tool, and he made it into a molten calf. And they said, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." They arose early in the morrow, and they offered up burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings. The people sat down to eat and to drink, and they got up to make merry. Moses turned and went down from the mountain, and the 2 tablets of the testament were in his hand. The tablets were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablets. And it was when he drew closer to the camp and he saw the calf and the dances, Moses' anger was kindled, and he threw the tablets from his hands, and he broke them beneath the mountain.
When one hears or reads this text, the question that jumps off the page is, how could this happen? Just 40 days previously, the nation experienced God with a vividness and a reality of the kind that we have labored to describe in a way that no other human beings had ever experienced. And in this action, 40 days after that, they violated every element of the divine revelation. Do not have any other gods before me. They made another god. Do not make for yourselves a graven form or image. They made a graven image. Do not bow down to them, do not serve them. They bowed down to it and they served it. If you want to trash God's command, this is as good as it gets. The extent of this catastrophe is highlighted in a dramatic midrashic interpretation, which is based upon one word in the description of the 10 Commandments. The tablets, it says there, were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God, charut, engraved on the tablets. And the Midrash picks up on this word charut, which means engraved, and the same letters with different vowels makes a different word entirely. Charut means engraved, but if you pronounce it as cheirut instead of charut, it means freedom or liberation. Let's see how the Midrash interprets this double meaning in text number 7 on page 151. And someone to read, please. I think, Simon, you were offering on the last occasion, you got pipped to the post.
Okay, I'll do it. Thank you. This is the meaning of what is written. I said you are divine, and that supernal beings you are all. Indeed, like Adam, you will die. Had the people of Israel waited for Moses and not done that deed, neither Galut, the exiles of the Jewish people, nor the angel of death would have had any power over them. Thus it is written, the writing was the writing of God, Charut, engraved on the tablets. What is the meaning of Charut? Cherut, freedom from exile, and Cherut, from the angel of death.
So there you are. The Midrash is drawing a parallel between the events in the Garden of Eden and the event at Sinai. And the parallel is a very close one. Adam and Eve were placed in the Garden of Eden and entrusted with the mission to work it and to keep it. Very soon after that, they transgressed by their transgressing against the very first commandment, not to eat from the tree. Very first commandment they were given by God. The result was that their lives and creation as a whole were turned upside down. The human being became mortal. Man's tranquil existence was replaced by a life defined by struggle and toil, all of which we discussed in lesson number 1. Now, in granting the Torah to the people of Israel, at this culminating moment at the beginning of the second 2,000 years, the years of Tikkun, entrusting them with the blueprint of creation and the fulfillment of the divine plan, God, in a sense, once again pressed the reset button. He took us back to that point prior to the eating from the tree, restoring the state of perfection that Adam and Eve enjoyed in the Garden of Eden. So embodied in these tablets was the gift of absolute cherut, freedom from toil, freedom from struggle, freedom from suffering, and freedom even from death. Just the way the world was supposed to be at its outset before Adam and Eve sinned. And like Adam and Eve, they almost immediately broke the first and most important divine commandment of their mission. And the tablets were shattered beneath the mountain. In other words, what this Midrash is telling us is that the breaking of the tablets was a repeat on a national level of what the expulsion from the garden meant on a universal level. But all is not lost. They're going to be given a second chance, a second set of tablets. Before we can answer our question, how could it have happened, we're going to have to take our story a little bit further. And in particular, we're going to have to understand some of the differences between the first and the second set of tablets. And therefore, it's time for our third and final video. It's text number 8 on page, I don't know, I forgot to note it down. But you're going to listen to
153.
153.
Thank you very much. Let me load the video. I have to load them one by one because otherwise they get all mixed up and you press the one button and the wrong one comes up, etc. So, and I will now share screen and set it off.
God said to Moses, "Carve yourself 2 stone tablets like the first, and I will write upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." He carved 2 stone tablets like the first, and Moses rose early in the morning, and he ascended Mount Sinai as God had commanded him, and he took in his hand 2 stone tablets. And he was there with God for 40 days and 40 nights. And he wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the 10 commandments.
Short video. So The people have repented. Moses has gone back up the mountain again to plead with God for a second chance. God has forgiven the people and has given them a second set of tablets. So everything's hunky-dory now? All okay? All fixed? No problem? Not quite. We know from all of our previous examples in the previous classes that every time there's an oops, there are going to be consequences and things are going to change. And it's no different this time. At the very least, we know from our troubled history of Israel, the many difficult exiles we've been in, the continued presence of death in the world, that the great promises that were held out by the first tablets were not present in the second, at the very least. It wasn't the world as offered before the expulsion from the garden. But over and above that, what else changed between the first and the second tablets? Let's compare some texts, starting with the instruction to Moses to prepare the second tablets. If you would now just turn to text number 6 on page 150 and take a look at lines 27 to 29. The tablets were the handiwork of God, and the writing was the writing of God engraved on the tablet. Now, if you could just keep your finger on that page and turn back to text number 8 on page 153, lines 1 to 5, relating to the second tablets. God says to Moses, carve yourself 2 stone tablets like the first, and I'll write upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke. Discussion time. What is the difference between these 2 texts? Spot the difference.
Moses had to carve the second set of tablets.
Well done. Well done, Barry. In both cases, God himself wrote the 10 commandments in the tablets. The difference, as Barry has pointed out, is in the source of the tablets themselves. The first tablets are described as the handiwork of God. The second tablets were carved by Moses, who carried them up with him when he ascended Mount Sinai. In other words, putting it this way, in the first tablets, both the content and the medium were divine. In the second tablets, the content was divine, God's words, but the medium was of human manufacture. The second difference between the 2 sets of tablets is expressed in texts 9 and 10 on your page 155. Somebody will please read these 2 texts, 9 and 10.
I've got it.
Thank you.
Said God to Moses, do not be distressed over the first tablets, which contained only the 10 commandments. In the second tablets, I am giving you also halacha, midrash, and agadah. Had Israel not sinned with the golden calf, they would have received only the 5 books of Moses and the book of Joshua. Why? Because as the verse says, much wisdom comes through much grief.
Well, well, well. There's a very big difference, therefore, between the first and the second tablets. The first tablets were intended to be just the written Torah. The second tablets includes the whole of the oral law. So what we're really saying over here is that according to the first quotation, text number 10, which was Midrash, and the second quotation, which was taken from the Talmud, the differences between the original giving of the Torah and the granting of the second tablets went a lot further than just a new set of stone tablets. It also entailed a radical change in the manner in which God elected to communicate at that time and to continue to communicate his Torah to us. Just a bit of history for those, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but we'll just run through it very quickly. As you know, the Torah consists of two parts. There's the written Torah and the oral Torah. So the core of the Torah is the 10 Commandments inscribed on the tablets. Each of these 10 Commandments, as we've seen, encapsulates within themselves all of the 613 Commandments. And God communicated these additional mitzvot to Moses in the first 40 days that he spent on Mount Sinai. And after that, there was continued communication to him in the tent of meeting, as you go through the Torah. Beyond that, for about the first 1,000 years, you have God communicating through prophets. But in essence, what we have is the 5 books of Moses, the written Torah, which we call the Chumash. We call it the Chumash because the word Chumash comes from the Hebrew word chamesh, which means 5, because there are 5 books. The oral Torah, which, by the way, was originally only permitted to be transmitted orally, and then subsequently was written down, are all the rules and the methodologies that Moses received that govern how the written Torah should be interpreted and applied. It's your rule book, like you have a rule book for grammar. And these form the basis of the oral law, which is that vast body of commentary and legal deliberations and moral and philosophical and mystical works, all of which derive from the written Torah and sit alongside it. So included in the oral Torah is the Talmud, the Midrashim, the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, that is, the Zohar, many thousands of other works composed by Torah sages over all the centuries. It's a work in progress, still being created to this day. Every generation continues the task of studying the Torah, applying it to the times and to the circumstances. The truth of the matter, however, is that if you're looking for an efficient way to communicate, the first way is a lot better. The first tablets contained only the written Torah because it's just a better, unambiguous way for God to communicate with man. And it worked pretty well for the first 40 years that people were wandering in the desert, and during that time of the prophets, until the end of the era of prophecy. So everything we needed to know could have been made known to us by God himself. In other words, both the content and the medium of the first tablets is the better way seemingly to do it. But in the second tablets, God chooses to do things differently. There will be a written Torah containing the basic laws and principles, but the task of interpreting these laws and applying them to the circumstances will not be given by God himself directly. They're going to be entrusted to the Torah sages of each generation, who are going to have to now use their own faculties, human faculties, not divine revelation any longer, to accomplish the end. The content will continue to be divine. The medium is now going to be human. And all of that is in the difference between the first and the second tablets that we identified a few moments ago. Is this a punishment for their terrible crime of the sin of the golden calf? Did we lose God's direct instruction to us? That we were left to struggle on our own? Or was it something else? Let's go back to our big question now. How did it happen? What went wrong? How could the people of Israel have worshipped an idol when they just experienced this greatest divine revelation of all time? The key to that question, which will put all of this into a context for us now, all lies in a word, again, the interpretation of a word in a verse describing the events at Sinai. Moses brought the people out from the camp toward God. We heard this in the first text. And they stood themselves beneath the mountain. Tachtit hahar in Hebrew. Beneath means at the foot of the mountain, of course. But the word tachtit literally means under the mountain. And this leads the Talmud to an extraordinary interpretation. It's your text number 11 on page 157. With the reader, please. Eleanor, why don't you read it for us?
Okay. This teaches us that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask and said to them, if you accept the Torah, fine. If not, there shall be your burial.
That sounds like this was a very, very coercive moment. You're not going to be given much choice, mate. Or at least you are being given a choice, but it's not a very palatable one. Either you do it my way or no way. Either you accept my Torah, or that's the end of you. You don't want to take up the task I'm giving you? Sorry, have no use for you in the world. That's where we seem to interpret this piece over here. And the problem is that it doesn't stack up. It doesn't make sense with everything else which has passed before. Because when you read the text, when Moses comes to the people and says to them, hey guys, big news, God is going to reveal himself to us. Do you want it? And all the people replied in unison and said, yes, 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 yes. All that God has spoken, we will do. That's the words in the Torah. This hardly sounds like a nation who are going to have to be coerced into accepting the Torah. So how do we reconcile their enthusiasm with the suggestion that we've just read in this piece of Talmud that they actually had to be coerced into receiving it? And here the Lubavitcher Rebbe offers a reconciliation. In an important text, number 12, on page 158. With a reader, please. Warren Starr, I can see you, so why don't you read it? You got it? Just unmute first. Yes?
So you want Warren to do it?
Yes, please. Warren.
Oh, sorry. How do we reconcile the saying of the sages that God overturned the mountain over them like a cask with the fact that the people willingly responded, we will do and we will hear? The deeper meaning is as follows. When the people of Israel stood at Mount Sinai, only 50 days had elapsed from their exodus from Egypt, which was the most debased place in the world in terms of decadent character, as is well known. This was not sufficient time for them to make the transition from one extreme to the other and achieve a genuine recognition of the value of the Torah. Rather, this recognition was forced on them from above, when the light of truth was revealed to them so powerfully that they could tangibly see that the Torah and the mitzvot were the ultimate good, and that without them, their lives were not worth living in the most literal sense. They therefore proclaimed with all their heart and soul, we will do and we will hear. However, because they did not achieve this recognition in a progressive and methodical way by their own efforts, but rather as a gift and as a flash of illumination from above, once the moment of the revelation had passed, nothing but a faint impression of it remained.
In this piece, the Rebbe is offering a stunning insight. Divine revelation doesn't really change anything. How do you like that? That's what happened. They had a big experience, but it didn't change anything, because divine revelations don't really change anything. We see this, by the way, in our own lives. We've all had big moments of truth in our lives. when we're inspired by some amazing experience. And it seems, you know, we've all said it. From this point onwards, my life is going to be different. It'll never be the same again. This is a transformational moment in my life. Nothing can ever be the same after this experience. And sure enough, a few days later, or maybe a few hours later, we're back in the same old groove. We stand in shul on Rosh Hashanah. We resolve, yes, I resolve to be a better Jew. We stand under a chuppah with the person we love so much that we're committing now to share the rest of our lives with them. These are big moments in our lives, points in time when you suddenly feel uplifted and energized. And you're absolutely certain that you're transformed forever. You fully expect that this experience is going to be a lasting one. It's going to do all the work for us. After the Rosh Hashanah experience, I'm definitely going to be a better Jew now. And after the chuppah experience, the rest of my life, please don't laugh, will be uninterrupted love, tranquility, and bliss with my chosen soulmate. It's not so much a laugh, it's a hollow laugh, isn't it? Because it never worked out that way. It never happened that way. Because the problem is that miraculous moments are just that, moments. They happen, and then they're gone. So what's the purpose of a miracle if it doesn't change us? And the answer is that they empower us to change on our own. The revelations from above have the ability at least to shake us out of our complacency. They can point us in the right direction. If we hold on to them long enough, we can work them into our lives. But the important thing is that we have to participate in the journey if we want to get anywhere real. And this is what Rabbi Akiva was getting at when he said that at Sinai, the Jews saw what is normally heard and they heard what is normally seen. Because sight is an overwhelming experience, a mountain over our heads. It overpowers us, but it doesn't engage us. We are passive recipients, not active participants. It's like watching a movie. The experience doesn't become us. We don't own it, however much we're moved by it. With hearing and understanding, the experience is something which we actively create, something which we build piece by piece with our own faculties. It may be less absolute, it may be less powerful, but it's ours because we worked it out ourselves, because we struggled and we toiled in the process. So it becomes part of us. It changes us, unlike the overwhelming but the transitory effect of seeing. And that is why the mantra and the creed of Judaism is summed up in the words, Shema Yisrael. Not see, O Israel, comprehend and understand. Because by understanding and comprehending, we're able to internalize in our lives that there's one God. And it doesn't come through the big revelation. It comes through our own effort. And this, therefore, is the answer to our question, how could it happen? The first tablets were a seeing experience, an overwhelming revelation in which they were the passive recipients, but the experience was over soon, and then the people reverted to the paganism of Egypt, back to the way of life to which they'd become habituated in their 2 centuries of exile and enslavement. But by contrast, the second tablets, in which the human being, Moses, has to actually create the matter into which the content is going to be poured, is considered to be a hearing experience, something which we're going to actively create step by step with our own faculties. Real change would only come from the second tablets, from tablets that were of a human manufacture, from a Torah which is not dictated from above, but which is the result of a partnership of divine revelation and human struggle and learning, with all the questions and the challenges and the disputations and the working it through and the arguments of God. That's what defines us as a nation, as a people. And most importantly, from the experience which arises step by painful step out of the struggles of life, that is where transformation occurs. Now, let me make this point, and it's not in this JLI course at all. It's a point that I want to suggest to you. So, and I'm saying that because maybe they've got truth and I'm just coming up with ideas. But in retrospect, what emerges from all of this for me is the realization that the events that we have been exploring for the past 4 weeks, the intermixing of good and evil, the capacity granted to mankind by God after the flood to influence outcomes in this world, bottom up, the great battles of Tohu versus Tikkun, might versus right, the dual pathways of personal spiritual perfection versus the imperative to repair and to fix a broken world, all of these complex issues of a morally compromised world, paradoxically, are more aligned with the second set of tablets that empower the Jewish nation to bring the world to perfection, rather than the first set, in which God resets the world to the state in which it was in prior to Adam and Eve's disobedience. It almost seems as if in this whole story, notwithstanding human choices along the way, that seems to directly undermine the divine plan, this is actually the world that God wanted. That's the revelation of all that we've been studying. That's what we take from the second tablets. He wanted us, with the aid of his Torah, to grapple with this gritty, messy place. And in the process, step by step, we would change ourselves and would change the world around us for the better. The partnership between God and man, between creator and created, together will bring humankind to recognition of God's imminent presence in the world, his divine plan from the outset. And you know, we sum up our mission statement in the last line of Aleinu L'Shabach, which, by the way, formally ends all of our prayer services. Everything else, Adon Olam En Kelekenu, they're all additions later on. Davening ends with Aleinu L'Shabach 3 times a day. And what does it end with? Vayom hahu yeyeh Hashem echad v'shmo echad. On that day, God will be one and his name will be one. That is the mission statement of Judaism. And it comes about as a result of what we're empowered with in the second broken tablets, the second set of tablets, not the first broken tablets. They were an image, once again, tantalizing, of a pristine world, no struggle, no death, immortality. But through all the events that we discovered in the last 4 sessions, that's not what the world became. And that wasn't the world to which the first tablets were suited. It wasn't a good shidduch. The second tablets are the ones that work for us.
I have a question.
Yes.
What you're saying is predicated on the golden calf episode, because if that hadn't happened, then this second set of tablets wouldn't have been shattered.
Yes.
First set of tablets, and then there wouldn't have been the second set of tablets. So God did God know that that was going to happen?
Yes, of course he knew about it, but it was left to our choice.
But we could have chosen not that wasn't going to happen. There may
Yes. Remember the outcome of the flood, the reset? Bottom up. We were given a choice to make the world of it what we will. We can destroy it, or we can bring it to its fruition, to its fulfillment. But God already foresaw what the choices were going to be. And that's actually the world that he wants. Because the other world doesn't make any sense for him. There's nothing that he gets out of the other world. But out of this, he gets something extraordinary. He gets a world in which there are raging forces that are potentially hugely destructive and that can obliterate the memory of his presence. And it's into that space that we have to enter and turn it around and change it. And if we can bring God into this world tangibly so that everybody recognizes his presence manifestly in our world, then that's an achievement. That would give pleasure to the Almighty.
Is this an extension of the Tohu Tikkun theme that you were?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. What I'm trying to say is there's a direct pathway all the way through. It's a sequence from one to the other. I saw a hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines that Andrew mentioned of this being a follow-up of Tohu and Tikkun.
Yes.
And I was wondering if, in fact, this way is the Tohu way, but it's again constrained by Tikkun.
Absolutely. We are the force of Tikkun in the world, and we have to take those forces of Tikkun and turn Tohu back into, with the layer energy of Teshuvah, bring those sparks back to the divine. Absolutely. Mike Zuluf, you have.
Yes, Shlomo. So I'm interested. Human nature is driven by the carrot and the stick, and I'm very much in agreement with how humans were inspired by the second set of tablets to action and to tikkun. But in the wake of the golden calf, there was also retribution for the perpetrators of the golden calf. So how does that juxtapose with the tikkun? And what role did it play in subsequent redemption, if you like, of the Jewish people?
You see, you touch, Mike, on the paradox which runs through all of these stories. The deceptions were deceptions in our earlier stories. You can't get away from that. And yet they led to outcomes that ultimately, for the purposes of our purpose in the world, they led to good outcomes. You do something wrong, you have to be punished for it. There's got to be retribution. The golden calf, there has to be retribution. After all, you can't get away from it. You can't turn around, the Jewish nation couldn't turn around and say, you see, it all worked out for the best. That's exactly what God wanted eventually. So, we're all good boys. We knew what God wanted. It doesn't work that way. There's the divine perspective and there's a human perspective. From a human perspective, you have sinned and therefore there's punishment. Right. From a divine perspective, who sees things in a different way altogether, as he directs his world towards its fulfillment, this is the way I actually wanted it to work out. And you can't actually reconcile those two perspectives, because one is a finite perspective ruled by the laws of right and wrong, the rules of choice, reward and punishment. And the other one is a much bigger, infinite divine perspective, which is beyond our capability of understanding.
Thank you.
Was there another comment from someone? Because I'm not quite finished yet. I have a postscript. The take-home message. that we always have to end with. Okay, you know, you go to a nice party, you get a doggy bag. Okay, well, every week there has to be a doggy bag. Here's our doggy bag for today. In text number 13 on page 160, it's a one-liner. Both the second tablets and the broken tablets were kept in the ark. So the innermost chamber of the temple was the Holy of Holies. Within it stood the most sacred vessel in the temple, the ark, which contained the tablets representing, of course, the covenantal link between Creator and creation. Both sets of tablets were kept there to remind us that we actually need both sets in our lives. Before we dismiss completely Revelation, the first set of tablets, because they weren't lasting, because they didn't do what needed to be done, because they didn't fit the world as it had actually developed by that stage, and the second set of tablets with the human participation in the medium is the better one for us. We need to remember that actually in that ark was not just the second set of tablets, but the broken pieces of the first set as well. They didn't, by the way, throw them onto the rubbish heap. They kept them, and they kept them in the ark. So, of course, we need the second tablets of human manufacture, because the daily struggle, as we've said, to work things out from with our own confines of our own flawed existence, without that, we have nothing real, nothing enduring. But we also need the first tablets. We need those high and miraculous moments in our lives. We need those revelations that everyone will experience in some form or another at some time of their life. It's true that their effect may be short-lived, but without them, we would remain trapped in the limitations of our little existence, our small existence. They lift us up, they take us out, we are transcended by them. We reach for a different place, we touch a different space. It's true that the effects of the revelation at Sinai seemed limited. 40 days later, we were back in Egypt. But in retrospect, the experience was the foundation of everything that we are today. And the same thing applies to the miraculous moments in our lives. The feelings we might have experienced at an inspirational, say, Ne'ilah service, or the high emotions standing under the chuppah in the moment in which we committed our lives to another person, might dissipate with the passage of time, but nevertheless, they remain foundational of everything which follows. It's possible that they might even be a little bit broken, but they're still our first tablets. And we in our lives have to preserve them and carry them around in our little ark inside of us, so that we can extract from them the excitement and the energy and inspiration with which we experience them. Because they're the foundation, the starting point of everything that we can establish in our lives, that we can accomplish in our lives with the second tablets. And there's one more point about the broken pieces. It's a sensitive subject, because for some people, and some people on this participating tonight, the broken pieces are a lot more hurtful and broken than others. Sometimes the broken pieces are bereavements, the loss of a parent, the loss of a sibling, God forbid, the loss of a child. There's lots of broken things in our lives, but we carry them with us. We carry them in our ark. because they make us who we are. We need to revere them, not cast them away. Not say that is so hurtful, I'm going to lock it out of my life and dispose of it and pretend that it's not there. That's not honest. We grow from the difficult times. And if the broken tablets mean some of the failures in our lives, the failure in a relationship, the failure in a big project in our lives, the failure of our dreams and of our aspirations and of our vision, of what we thought we could be, of what we thought our marriage could be, etc. And they're all the broken pieces of our lives. What are you going to do with them? And the Torah is just teaching us the most beautiful, beautiful lesson over here in that one-liner. One-liner. Both the second tablets and the broken tablets were kept in the ark. That is one of the profoundest teachings that the Torah has to offer us in that one-liner. Or how to live our lives, how to carry through our pasts, how to remember, and how to cherish some of those relationships that we now understand are broken because they're no longer there. You know, I say these words for my sister and myself in this Zoom call because because we're in a year of mourning for my mum. You know, and it's a difficult year. It's part of the brokenness, you know, in our life. We've all had to go through. We all have to go through that. Sometimes our parents don't live forever. Neither do we, as it happens. But so far, we're still all here. At least the ones who are participating tonight. Yeah. So that's the take-home lesson. In two respects. One, in a positive way, that the high moments, even though they are somewhat transitory, they don't always last forever, but there's a residue, there's a part of it which becomes the foundation for all that follows. And we need both the first tablets and the second tablets. And the fact the first tablets are broken tablets and they sit alongside in the ark together with the second tablets is an important principle for us in terms of how we deal with the past and how we move forward to the future. So when I said that tonight's class is a step change, it is because in a sense, it brings to fruition everything that we've studied in the previous 4 weeks. And I've always insisted that although JLI go out of the way to tell us that these are standalone sessions, which they are indeed, and you can come into any one of them, but I've also seen and understood that there is a developmental theme that runs throughout all of them that brings us to tonight, which, by the way, is not the final one in our offering. It's only the penultimate one. And you'll ask, where can we go after Matan Torah? What's left? And the answer is one more for next week.